Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 143 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Mae Yoshikawa for this episode. And Mae's boys were young when her husband died. One of them was 8 years old, and the other was just 5 months old. And I want you to listen in our discussion for the important question that Mae asked her older son after her husband died. She asked him, what if the question right now is not why? This harkens back to her own experience when her mom became gravely ill when Mae was a young adult. And before we jump into my discussion with Mae, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. So first of all, Widowed Parents Unite is now available for pre-order. You can get all the information and pre-order a signed and personalized paperback or a Kindle ebook at widowedparentsunite.com. And I do want to say that at the moment, the paperback signed copies are only available for shipping to the US, but not to worry, you will be able to order print books all around the world by the time the book is published on October 24th. It's just the pre-orders right now have US shipping only. The full title, Widowed Parents Unite, 52 Tips to Get Through the First Year from One Widowed Parent to Another. So in this book, there are 48 contributing authors, plus me, so 49 of us altogether, from all around the world, moms and dads, people with different types of losses, different ages of kids, lots of different stories and experiences. Some people who do grief work professionally now, and some people who don't, and wanted to share their stories with you, our listeners and our readers, to kind of reach out a hand from those of us who are already on this path that we never expected, to then people coming after us, the widowed parents who are newer in this journey. So do check that out, and be sure you're following us over at Widowed Parent Institute on Instagram for more news as we go along. And you can meet some of the contributing authors there. They're amazing. I know you'll want to meet them and learn a little bit about their stories as well. And by the way, our guest today, Mae, is one of our contributing authors. So that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Mae Yoshikawa. Mae is an author and yogi based in Tokyo, Japan. She is a global ambassador for Adidas and a columnist for Women's Health Japan. She is a widowed parent of 2 young sons, and she's joining us today from Tokyo, Japan. Mae, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. I'm so delighted to speak with you.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to this. I think there's so many new things to talk about here today. We've got yoga, and we've got your book, and I've never had a guest from Japan before. So this is terrific. And I know as we were chatting before, there may be some cultural things to talk about and just all different experiences. And I think you've done well, and actually I maybe this is a spoiler. I don't know. I want to get to your article about tennis. I think it was called, where did I write that down? Something about how a tennis star, what a tennis legend taught me about grief.
Right.
So, so many things to explore today, but why don't we just start back at the beginning? Can you tell us a little bit about your life when everything was normal, before everything changed, before your husband died? What was normal life for your family?
Oh, goodness. Normal might go back some time, because I think even, I should mention that my late husband, the one who passed in a traffic accident in 2018, he was my second husband. So prior to that, I had 5 or 6 years of single parenting my first son from my first marriage in my 20s, which ended up in a very difficult divorce. And so in a different way, there was a lot of grief around that too. And in that sense, it wasn't my first time to become a single parent, right?
Right.
Like after that loss. So there's that kind of a dynamic in there too. And if I were to even rewind further, prior to the experience of my first marriage and it ending in divorce, years before that, in my teenage years, my mother fell sick to a very rare neurological disease.
Oh.
And that was in the late 90s. She was 47 when symptoms first started to show, symptoms of amnesia, misrecognition of three-dimensional features. So she might be thirsty and reach for a glass of water and completely miss the cup.
Okay.
And you can imagine, so she was 47 and I was 17 when symptoms first started. The condition was so rare that it took 2 whole years and 9 different university hospitals before they came up with a diagnosis. And even when they did, they said, so my mother is half American and half Japanese. She was a lefty.
Okay.
But her brain condition was such that the right hemisphere of her brain was shrinking.
Oh.
So there were all of these atypical things in the mix that just complicated all of the testing procedures and the diagnosis and all of that. At the end of which they said, let's put atypical Alzheimer type dementia in her charts. Super young onset, right? She's in her 40s.
Yeah.
But let's put that in her charts so that we can prescribe this medication for her. And the doctors statistically gave her 10 years to live tops.
Okay.
So that was, at the beginning of me turning 20 and going to university still.
Right. Shocking.
Very shocking and very difficult. And I would even say that in Japan, I only know the Japanese term for this, but the kaigo hoken seido, like the government system to support these kind of handicapped people, only was legally in place in 1998. So she was, very much at the early phase of that too. So there were so many things that were new to us about hiring helpers and getting help in our home, and how do we take care of her as her condition progressively changes, and will we use a facility, and when will she switch, and all of these things, all of the decision making, which I would now I'm in my early 40s, and I would look at that and say, that was my experience of grief. Probably my first experience of grief.
Sure.
Albeit being slow, relatively slow and gradual, and with a lot of ambiguity and a lot of confusion.
Right.
But the thing is, I had no knowledge of that. I didn't know to call it grief. I was not at all educated about it. There was nobody around me who could help me along those lines.
Right.
Which is why actually it made me sick. I suffered from insomnia, depression. I think in the darkest times, I wanted to take my own life, and it ate up at my physical and emotional well-being to a point where at some point in my early 20s, I was 20 going on 21. Doctors would prescribe me like antidepressants and sleeping pills. And I know that medication can be very helpful and necessary for some, but for me, I felt like it would be kind of glossing over the symptoms and not really looking at the root cause, because I was already going through so much, right? So at the time, I chose not to take the medication, and I went to alternative methods like acupuncture and different things, which helped me somewhat. But it was during this dark time that I essentially landed at yoga and meditation, because I felt my health slipping away along with my mother's.
And this is when you were in your early 20s, mid 20s?
Early 20s. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So it's kind of all mixed in.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And let me ask, is your mother still alive today?
No, she passed in 2014. So she outdid what the doctor said by another 7 years, but
Wow.
she
Okay.
passed. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I was able to be with her when she took her last breath. But that's another incredible story, actually. But I had such a beautiful way of being able to be fully present with her in her last moments. And can you imagine, as a yogi first, I'm listening and paying attention to my breath. As a yoga teacher, I'm fully trained to be present with you, your mind, your consciousness, and your breath. And my mom in the last maybe 10 years of her life couldn't speak, couldn't lock eyes with me, couldn't communicate with me, but I knew those final moments. And I felt her, like she called me. So I sat by her in her bed, and I was the one that was holding her hand, and I was the one that was listening to her breath. And for the first time in my life, I listened deeply as someone took their last. Right?
Yeah.
But that was the way that I was able to see her off. So I don't know, there was such intimacy about that, and in her case also, because she was ill for 17 years. That's half of my life. She died when I was 34. So so as difficult as it was, there was a rightness in the order of things that I got to see her off in that way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you for telling us about that. And I'm wondering now, so now we know spoiler, right? Your husband died. That's why we're talking today.
Right.
How did the earlier experience with your mom come into play at all? Did make things, I don't know, easier or harder or different? Like, how did those experiences kind of interplay?
Yeah, Jenny, you really hit the nail on the head when you asked me that question, because I think that's the enormous lifesaver for me. So what happened was, through my experience with my mom, and this is like years before her passing, but in the initial years of her condition really worsening and really changing from this vibrant, healthy, beautiful, former model mom that I knew, to wheelchair, can't use the bathroom on her own, can't eat on her own, can't lock eyes with me, can't call my name anymore, kind of a transformation, right?
Right.
The mental narrative in my mind was why. I don't think I voiced it so much as screamed it to myself in my mind. Why, Mom? Why me? Why us? Why this disease? Why now? Why God? Why? All sorts of curse words. Why? Right? And this mental narrative tortured me. It made me sick, because that kind of thinking was not serving my wellness, my healing, and my acceptance of the reality that was grief and slow loss in the case of my mom. So I harbored this why thinking deep in my heart for a good 3 years. But as I started my practice of yoga, I was trained to listen to my breath. Like, what kind of foods do I eat that allow deep breathing versus what kind of foods do I eat that really clog up my breathing? What kind of people do I speak and, listen to that make me breathe freely versus what kind of people make me really nervous and tense and I can't breathe? All of these things. And so somewhere down the line, I realized that my own thinking wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving my deep breathing. It wasn't serving my health. It wasn't serving my wellness. And so for the first time after 3 years, I chose consciously to let go of the narrative, why? not because I got the answer to why God, but I saw how it wasn't serving me in the sense that why was I asking why? Why wasn't I asking why not me? Would it be okay? Would it be okay if it happened to somebody else's mom? Would it be okay if it happened when she was 99 as opposed to 49?
Right.
Would it be okay if it happened to dad instead of mom? Grandpa instead of grandma? Like all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize, bottom line, my mental narrative wasn't absolute. And it sure as hell wasn't serving me. And against all obstinate, stubborn resistance in myself, I finally, reluctantly chose to let it go, even though I didn't have the answer to why.
And wait, this was while your husband was still alive, or this is
even before I got married the first time.
Oh, okay, like long time
in my
ago.
early early 20s. But I would say that was really kind of the beginning of me really taking hold of my life and my consciousness, because I chose to change my mind.
Okay.
So with that experience in my early 20s, and then I had another 10, 15 years of yoga and meditation and studying in India. So fast forward all those years, and when my second husband, who was a vibrant young athlete, super fit, like steaming hot, and then one day he left for work, was killed in a traffic accident, and never came home. So it was super sudden and super shocking.
Yeah.
And so, but here's my point though. When he died, as shocking as it was, and as sudden as it was, I never asked why. I never asked. I never asked, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to us? I didn't have any of that mental narrative going, because I knew deep down that it's the human condition that we all live and we all die, and none of us know when we're going to die or how we're going to die. And I had learned to live so closely with that truth that I didn't let that kind of human-y mental narrative of why to torture me when my husband died. And I'm not at all saying that it made my grief any easier, but I am saying that I feel like it saved me in the sense that it kept me from going nuts. Like it kept me from losing my mind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for talking to us about that. So powerful.
Yeah.
I'm thinking here, well, this might be switching gears a little bit, but I can't help but think of something I noticed on your website where you're talking about a new book that you're working on.
Right.
And I think for listeners, you've written a few books in Japanese in the past, I think about yoga and related things.
Correct. Yeah. Yoga, lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. But you have a new book in progress.
Yes.
Tell us what it's called.
It's called Kizuki, Life's Tidal Waves plus Epiphanies equals Love Beyond Time and Death.
Kizuki. Okay. So I'm going to watch for that. And it's going to be in English. So that's perfect for me. I don't speak Japanese.
Right.
I suppose that most of my listeners don't speak Japanese. Maybe if you do. But I saw something on your website. It looks like it may be a page from the book or something. A question, a powerful question. If the high forces of the universe came down to you today and asked, do you like your life as you were living it? Would you like a do-over? What do you think you would say? Is that a page from the book?
Yeah, it pulls a message out of a key episode in my book where I share about one of the early days of acute grief. Because my experience of loss of my husband was just so sudden. It happened in minutes, right? And while my second son, Aiden, was only 5 months old, and so he was just this tiny baby strapped in a baby carrier most of the time, my older boy, Isa, was 8 years old. He's old enough to understand the gravity of it, to try to begin to make sense of it in his own way. But how do you navigate waters like that, right? And of course, I had suddenly become this newly widowed parent.
Yeah.
And I watched him as an 8-year-old. He started to ask himself, why, Mom? Why did that driver hit him?
Oh.
Why did this happen to us? Why was it this day? Why was it that time? Why was it Daddy? You know, he started asking all of the why questions that any human mind would almost automatically go to.
And it sounds like the similar type of questions you had asked yourself a couple decades before about your mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So how did you navigate that or help him with those questions?
I held him in silence, and I allowed him to have all of those questions tied with all of those emotions that he rightfully gets to feel. I never denied any of them because I knew well enough to know that denying it didn't work for me. So the least I could do was just to be there with him and hold space for him. And I let him cry, and I let him wail, and I let him grieve, and I grieved with him, and I would just hold him. And then, you know, like when you're crying or when a child is crying and you're sobbing and you're a mess and you're hiccuping and like for however long it takes to let that intensity exhale out of you. And then, but somewhere down the line, though, there's a moment in there where you reach for the tissue or you turn around because you need to stretch your arm or something. But there's that little bit of a crack in a moment in the intensity.
Okay.
And so the first time that little crack in the moment of intensity came around, I asked him, I said to him, what if the question isn't why? What if the question, you know, maybe I said, maybe there will come a time that's more appropriate to ask why, and maybe you'll get an answer then. But what if now is not the time to ask why? What if why is not the question that hits the target right now? And, you know, a child is just so pure in their presence and in their awareness. And if I presented him with a new perspective like that, in his 8-year-old way, in his silence, he took it in. He just took it in. You know, I don't think he gave it an answer or anything, you know, maybe it was even a rhetorical question. Maybe I wasn't looking for an answer, but I know that he took a moment to let it sink in. And as he did so, then I said, well, what if, I said to him, you know, because I had been a single parent to him prior to meeting my second husband. So I said to him, well, remember life back then? Remember when we used to live in our old apartment and there was this cherry blossom tree out back? And remember that? You know, I said, remember how we were so happy? I was a single parent, but we were still happy. We had our own thing going. And yeah, we just had our own little family going. And I suggested to him, can you remember that? And he said, yes. And I said, what if, just what if God came down from heaven, or whatever high forces of the universe came down from heaven to you in that moment before we met my second husband, who became Isa's stepfather. And the high forces came down and asked you, dear Isa and Mae, I have found the most perfect man for you. You will come to love him and he will come to love you dearly. And I was making this like hollow
dramatic
for him. Yeah. And I said, and I continued. I said, so he will come to love you dearly and you will love him as a father, but he can only stay with you for 2.5 years. After that, he must go someplace else. Would you still like to have him in your life? Would you still like to meet and know him? And he took that in and he went silent for a while. Little 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
He went silent for a long while. And I was so careful not to probe, not to speak, just to let him have his moment. Because I was like, this silence, this extended silence is this boy getting to know the depths of his heart. And I must not intrude.
That's hard though.
Yes. And that for me is where the yoga and the meditation comes in, right? Because that's kind of been my training. I had no idea that I would be using it in this way, of course. But But at the end of his long silence, this dear boy, he said, 2.5 years, he said. That he would take 2.5 years of knowing this man and having this awesome person in his life.
That was his choice. He would take the 2.5 years instead of skipping the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh, how beautiful.
And I think that was one of the early kind of conversations. And navigating high waters like that is a step-by-step thing. There isn't really a correct way or a correct answer. I just had to be attentive to what feels right for me and what I feel is the best thing that I can offer to my children. Right. But yeah, those are some of like the deep-hearted conversations that I had with my son.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned that your son also has gone to grief camp. Can you tell us, did you find a grief camp in Japan? How did you find a grief camp? Like, tell us kind of how that went.
Yeah, so I was widowed when I was 37. And in Japanese culture, like even getting divorced and becoming a divorcee is seen many times like a no-no or like some kind of like a negative marking on your record or something like that, So in this case, I was divorced, and then I also became a widow, which I like to say I'm a widow-say. It's
people didn't know what to do with you because you had like two bad like things.
Well, yeah. Aside from pity me or say, oh, that's really unfortunate. Why do bad things keep happening to her or whatever, however they may have interpreted it. And a lot of times people aren't saying these things in your face. You just kind of like sense them in the whispers behind your back, right?
Yeah.
So I had, in the initial days especially, I was very much isolated through my grief. And I guess there were two aspects to that. One is the cultural one. I felt like the culture didn't really know how to handle young widowhood. And the second aspect of it is that through my job as a yoga teacher and a studio owner, in some small way, I'm a leader in my community. And so if I were to grieve out loud as a leader, I felt like I would make everyone grieve with me. I felt like I would worsen the pain for everyone else too. And so, and I don't know, if that was a good thing or a bad thing, or it was just my way. Like I also didn't want to expose myself to having to feel and be a leader when I needed to be weak and vulnerable. And, I just needed to fall apart, So in light of all of that, and also this weird aspect where I'm bilingual, bicultural, I'm more or less equally comfortable in English and Japanese, but quite often my emotions tend to come more in English than in Japanese.
Interesting. I wonder why that would be.
Yeah, so when I watch movies or when I listen to music, I prefer English as opposed to Japanese.
Yeah.
So things like that, like of emotive nature, I tend to express and to take in English.
But you did grow up you grew up in Japan, right? You didn't grow up here and then move. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Japan, but I grew up going to international schools.
Okay.
So when I sought out therapy, for example, I sought out therapists that I can speak with in English.
Interesting.
And then, when I sought out therapy for my son, I wanted to have that option for him too. But all in all, it was such a hard road because there were so few available. And then I would just go down the list and start calling these places. And so many of them were so full that they were like, well, I can book you for 6 months in advance. And I was like, 6 months? I mean, I have no idea how I'm going to be feeling in 6 months, right?
Wait, is this for therapists or for grief camps?
For therapists. Okay. And to my knowledge, I don't know of any grief camps here in Japan. Like camps in general is not such a huge culture for children here.
Okay.
Yeah. So then my bestie gifted me the book Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, probably within like the first 6 months of grief. Mm-hmm. And in this book, there's like a quick short paragraph where she mentions experience camps and how it was great for Cheryl's 2 daughters. And so I immediately looked up experience camps and I contacted them to ask them if they would be willing to take an international camper. And they said yes.
Oh, good.
And so
they don't have camps in Japan.
No.
You had to come to the US.
Flew. Yeah, we flew to California to send them to camp in San Diego. Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, speaking of San Diego, this is a complete diversion. But have you been to Camp Widow in San Diego?
I have not, and they were definitely on my radar. So I was actually even just looking at their website because I thought if the timing would match, then maybe I could go too. But unfortunately, they're not in that location on those dates. So.
Oh, bummer. Well, sometime you should check that out. Anyway, back to your story.
Yeah. Well, that almost like it makes me want to ask you, like, is it fun?
It is fun. It is fun. It's okay. It sounds crazy, right? And first of all, for listeners, it's not camping, right? It's at a nice hotel. I know it's a Marriott or some fancy hotel in San Diego. And they also do it in Toronto and someplace in Florida. And they're doing something in Australia now. I'm not sure if it's the same or if but they're doing something in Australia. That might be a little closer to you. I don't know. But San Diego, it's like usually 3 or 4 nights. And, there's workshops and speakers. I think they had maybe 500 widowed people at this last one. And they actually run a kids program during it as well.
Oh, wow.
A separate kids camp, if you will. But it's, they usually on Saturday night, they have like a dance party. And I remember the first day, I went by myself, right? I didn't know anybody. And so when it was time for lunch on the first day, kind of look around at the people sitting around you and like, oh, well, do you want to go find lunch? Right. Like, so 4 of us went to this restaurant. We're sitting outside and I remember one of the women was telling us stories about how her husband had wanted to become a palm tree after he died, and he'd been cremated, and he wanted to be buried under a particular palm tree so that his remains would help fertilize the soil or something. I don't know. Anyway, she was telling this story, but she was telling it in such a funny way that people couldn't help like laughing. And of course, none of it is funny, but the way she's telling this particular story was very funny. And I couldn't help but wonder, right, what the people at the tables next to us were thinking, hearing all of us talking about, anyway.
But I love that.
Yeah.
No, I think it's kind of actually really valid to my point though, because I feel like, and I am generalizing, so I don't want this to be like a blanket statement, but generally speaking, in Asian culture, and especially in Japan, where emotional expression is more reserved, sometimes even repressed, as in even the language is very monotone, right? People don't move their mouths and use their hands as much when we're speaking in Japanese. You know, the mannerisms. This is a bowing culture. We don't touch each other. We don't like give hugs. We don't give high fives. Like, it's just a different culture.
Okay.
And so, meaning, like, somehow it translated into death and grief and widowhood and all of these things. Somehow, like, you're not supposed to be having fun, or you're not supposed to be light-hearted about it. And naturally, these things are very difficult, challenging,
for sure,
periods, like, universally. So I'm not at all saying that any part of grief is fun, right. But I think it's human nature that at some point, after all the crying, after all the shock, and after all the morbidity, we have a need to laugh. Mm-hmm. We have a need to make light of the first opportunity you see, whether it's cremation, ashes under a palm tree, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if some of your listeners might relate, because, for me, his loss came so suddenly. It was just within minutes. And I didn't even get to go to a hospital to see him off. I basically met him at the morgue. Because it was so sudden, right? Mm-hmm. He was killed instantly. And so I went from having this, we had just welcomed our second baby 5 months prior to that.
Yeah. And
we had moved into a bigger apartment. He bought us a new car, a new washing machine, coffee maker, a wide king size bed, all of these things. We had this whole, like, happy growing family thing going. And he was just super thrilled and excited to be providing for the family and, like, heading to work in the morning. And it was from there that I just, within minutes, was notified of the accident and all of these things. And so, obviously it was just, I don't even know how to put it. I was just in this dark, timeless vacuum, like a black hole or something, where my world had stopped. My world, my life, like I had died with him. And so that happened in spring of 2018. And one of my close friends, they live in America, and they said, they were so sweet. I don't know. He just called me up and he said, come and spend the summer with us. Like, he must have recognized something that, I don't know, that I needed some space for myself. I needed to pull myself out of my normal environment in the home that we had shared and all of this. And he said, just bring your kids. He has his own kids, and he's like, just, we'll spend the summer together. You can be in our guest room or whatever. So I got to stay with them at their house for pretty much the whole summer, that first summer. And I'm in shock. I'm in grief and all of these things. But in between, I had a need to find pockets of light, to laugh when possible, and to make jokes. And in many ways, that was kind of a survival method for me, because without those pockets of light, it's like I didn't get to breathe, I was so underwater, and I needed to breathe. I needed to just, So I remember, like, cracking stupid jokes and, and I didn't care. I don't know if you had this too, Jenny, but after such a significant loss like that, I just felt like I had nothing more to lose, and I just didn't give a damn about anything. And so, I remember, like, one day they had some people over, and there was this big American thick chocolate cake. Okay, like, cakes in America are 5 times sweeter than anything they bake in Japan. And not my normal sort of go-to thing. Not even, like, appealing to my palate or anything, but I was like, oh, this is just gonna be fun. and I would just like be eating it. And then one of my friend's kids were like, well, like, are you okay? Like, you're going at this. And then I ate it that night. It was like left over on the counter the next morning, and it was about to be thrown in the bin. And I just kept eating the thing, like I didn't care. And they were like, are you okay? And I was like, I get to do anything I want. My husband just died. Like that was kind of my sort of dark humor around it. But that's another cultural dynamic for me, I think, is that it's, that some slight sense of humor or a lightness or something to revive me.
Yeah. In terms of experience camps, back to that, so you called them up and you asked if they would take international students, and you flew over to California. And has your son, did he enjoy it? Or I don't know if enjoy is the right word. Was it a worthwhile experience?
Yeah, I think enjoy is the right word. And it was most definitely worthwhile. So it was 6 days long. And they do such a terrific job. Taking care of the children. Well, first of all, they make the camp for free, right? And they make it available to a wide range of children. And they have such a beautiful way of incorporating all of the kids from different age groups and different cultures and different backgrounds. And then, so they have all the normal fun camp things, like, I don't know, vanilla milkshake making and pool jumping and horseback riding and whatever camp stuff.
Right.
And then in the evening time, they would gather around the campfire and they would have these sharing circles. Not mandatory, but if you're willing, you're invited to show a picture of your deceased loved one and share the experience that you've gone through, your experience of loss. So my son was 8 when he lost his stepdad, and 9 the first time he attended this camp. He had just turned 9. And after 6 days of that, when he came back and I picked him up at the airport, he's got this big backpack, and I was it was just so endearing to welcome him back. And I was like, how was it? And the first thing he said to me, Jenny, he goes, Mom, the world is a large place.
Oh,
so I said, why? Yeah. I said, why? What made you feel that? And he goes, well, we had these sharing circle things. And I found another kid just like me who had also lost his father in a traffic accident, and very suddenly.
Oh.
And I thought that gifting a child with that experience gives him a sense of connection, experiential connection that lets him know that he is not alone.
Which is huge.
Which is enormous.
Yeah.
And it exposed him, it expanded him to the idea that, when he comes back to Japan and he's in his school, maybe he doesn't know of any other kids who've lost a parent. And then the other kids don't have any idea the gravity of what he's gone through. So they don't really touch upon it, But there it is for him once a year when he goes to this camp. He's in a room full of other kids that get it.
Yeah.
And I think it became kind of like a touchstone for him to feel rooted, that it's okay to be different in some circles, but it's okay to just be him and to be true and to be real and be who he is in his own experience. I think that's just priceless,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I mean, I know kids here too, I think it's not just in Japan, complain that their friends, their regular friends at school, they don't get it. Right. They don't know what to say, or they say stupid things. And usually they mean well. And kids are still learning all kinds of things, but it's definitely a problem that I hear, parents reporting and kids reporting. And going to something like experience camps, Camp Aaron, any of the grief camps, even the grief groups, there are centers in different cities here. I don't know if there are any in Japan that run, year round once a month or twice a month kind of programs, and having that chance to connect with those kids who get it on some fundamental level, right? Even if their experience was different, right? One lost a parent in a traffic accident. One lost a parent to a longer term, like a cancer or something.
Yeah.
There's this sort of a fundamental, like, you're not the only weird kid with a dead dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what happened after that? So maybe 3-4 years after that. And then of course COVID happened. So he couldn't go to camp in 2020. Nobody could. And then 2021 was, the camp happened in 2021, but it was a little bit still too difficult for us to travel internationally. And then, somewhere down the line, he came home from school one day. I think maybe he must have been in like 6th grade or something, 6th or 7th grade. And, boys, they don't talk as much. They're not as they're not into talking about how they feel and all that stuff. So usually it's like, oh, how was school? Good. How was your day? Good. And that's like the length of our conversation. But on this night, he goes, Mom, something happened at school today. So I said, what happened? He goes, well, his friend, I'll just say Kay, his friend Kay, got pulled out of class today. I said, oh, what happened? He says, well, the school got a call that his mom had died.
Oh, no.
Apparently she had been battling cancer, but he got the call on that day and got pulled out, and so he didn't come back to school for a few days. And then a few days later, before the kid was coming back to school, the teacher took a moment to let the other children know that Kay had just lost his mother. So please be kind and please be compassionate and please be understanding. And so my son, Isa, for the first time, got a view of the other side. It kind of like put 2 and 2 together for him, where years prior to that, he was the kid that got pulled out, and he was the kid that had to make the comeback to school and the reincorporation into the school community and stuff.
Yep.
And so he told me this, and I said, how did that make you feel? And he didn't really have much words for that. He just said, well, I guess I know how he feels. So I said, well, does Kay know that you've also lost a parent? And he's like, well, I'm not sure. He said, well, would you like to tell him sometime when you have the opportunity? That maybe that way he can feel less alone too. So he's like, yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just, it was just a simple conversation like that, but it showed me the depth of maturity that my son had developed through his experiences and through everything that he's experienced and learned through camp and all of these things,
Yeah. Maybe next time Isa goes to camp, you can bring along the friend.
Oh, yeah. I definitely, I shared it with the school counselor and stuff, because I didn't want to be butting in and giving too much info or whatever, but I said, this is something they might be interested in.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for sharing all these things. I think, what we haven't gotten to yet, and I want to get to before we wrap up, is what the tennis legend taught you about grief. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'll put a link. You wrote a beautiful article about it. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, thank you so much. So, gosh, in, I don't know, my first year, especially of grief, my sense of time is so messed up and so blurry. It's hard to say how many months had passed or whatever, but somewhere I think within the first maybe 6 to 10 months after having lost my husband, I was still very much a hermit, staying inside the house for the most part. And I'm not much of a TV watcher. I don't turn it on. But this one day, for whatever reason, I turned on the TV, and it was right when the tennis player Naomi Osaka had beat Serena Williams for the first time.
Okay.
And this sweet girl Naomi, she has this very demure, kind of like soft-spoken demeanor about her, and then she's just like a killer on court, And so the Japanese media was all over Naomi and tennis as a sport. And so tennis, it's a popular sport, obviously, but not as popular as national sports like baseball and soccer. And so this daytime TV show was featuring how to properly watch tennis. Tennis is a sport from the UK, from Wimbledon. And so it's recommended that you wear collared shirts, and it's a highly individuated, high pressure sport. So it's best that you don't be too loud or too rowdy in the audience, or no flash photography and like all of these things. It was just like supposed to be for some level of basic education or something.
Okay. And
then the program suddenly clipped this footage of an older tennis legend, Japanese lady named Kimiko Date.
Okay.
Who is like a princess-like figure. She's very much adored nationally here. But they pulled this one footage of however many years ago where she was in a really heated moment in a tournament, and she double faulted. And right when she double faulted, the entire stadium, like the Japanese audience behind her, let out this tangible, deep, long kind of like sigh.
Yeah.
At which point, Kimiko turned to the stadium and she went, "Taiki," which translates as something like, "All you ever do is sigh." and it was just kind of like funny how the program had featured that clip thing to say, oh, that's obviously a no-no. You should not express your emotions like that. You should not, on Kimiko's part and on the part of the audience sort of thing.
Okay.
But when I saw that scene, in some weird way, it doubled over with me and my experience of grief. I had just lost my husband, and I'm left with 2 children and a new car and a new washing machine and a new bed in this apartment. And I felt, subjectively, I felt like the whole of Japanese culture was like sighing
at
this
you.
Deep, pathetic sigh behind my back. That's how I perceived it.
Okay.
And while I didn't have the audacity or the strength to turn around and talk back at them like Kimiko did on court, I watched that scene and I was like, oh my God, I am her. Like I am Kimiko, with like the whole of Japanese society sighing down my back. And it kind of helped me realize how misaimed and how unhelpful it was, this energy of pity. It made me sort of like surgically dissect the difference between sympathy and pity.
Interesting. Tell us more about that.
Well, because there is such a thing as, I'm sorry for your loss. If there's anything I could do to help you and support you, please let me know. Right? Okay, that's sympathy. And then turning around and saying to somebody else, maybe not to your face quite often, but maybe they turn around and they might be like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's who can help her. There's nothing we could do. Like that leans into pity. And that energy, like we all know, right? If you've ever experienced any loss, you know that any energy of pity does not help you heal. It just helps you to wallow. It's like, it's this whole like victimhood thing. And so I felt like it was such an uphill, like upstream battle to individually, for me, choose, okay, I can see how the whole of the world might pity my situation and might overly sympathize to the degree that it leans into pity. But I don't regret that I married my husband. I don't regret that he loved me. I don't regret that we had children. I don't regret that we lived the way that we did. And like my 8-year-old son said that night, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would.
Yeah. Choose the 2.5 years.
I would. Because that's how good it was. And that's how transformative it was for my life.
Yeah.
And so, no, you don't get to pity that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can go home and pity all you want, but no, I'm not taking it from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not the way I choose to live my life. Those are not the thoughts that I choose to let infest my mind. And so I had this kind of epiphany through this tennis legend sort of scene. But it really helped me to own the fact that what thoughts I would choose, and that I would not let pity enter my psyche. You know, and I sure as hell didn't want my children to grow up watching a mother who would continue to pity herself in her situation. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Well, this reminds me, this might be my favorite thing that I saw on your website. I don't know where it was, but you said about your children, may they grow up watching mama live to her fullest potential, and may I live to be such an example.
Yeah. And, you know, in some mysterious way, my experience of death and loss really woke me up to that. You know, not that I was so asleep to it before, because, so I guess I haven't mentioned yet that my husband was a former heavyweight MMA fighter.
Oh.
And so he being in the field of Budo, like martial arts, and me having had decades of training in yoga and this kind of like Eastern art of mind, body, spirit, you know, we lived in such a way that, I mean, every moment, every day, we did our best to live without regret, you know? And I think that's been a saving grace for me, that even though I lost him so suddenly, there was nothing left unsaid or undone, or nothing that I regretted, like, oh, I should have told him, or, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I didn't have any of that. So I feel very, very grateful for that. And I know that that's not everybody's experience of loss. There's a lot more ambiguity and confusion for a lot of people. So, and that can also be brought into consciousness and to be cleared after the fact too. But so it's not that we weren't living to our fullest before. I think I was already, you know, together with him, we were already working in that direction. But after his loss, there was even more of a sense of, there's nothing to lose, Mae.
Yeah.
You can be even more fearless. And that, again, for me, a large part of that comes back to the culture too, because a lot of times the culture here in Japan emphasizes uniformity. Don't be too different from everyone else. And not just in Japan, but a lot of times, like if you're a woman, or like I'm a female entrepreneur, widorsay, single parenting my 2 children that are like from different biological fathers. You know what I mean? It's like get over it, Mae. You're just not normal, you know? So, but you know what I did? Like one of the other things that I did in my, I don't know, first year or so of grief is when it dawned upon me that, okay, Mae, get over it, Mae. You're a widorsay, like you're divorced and you're widowed. I decided to Google who else is widowed and divorced.
Oh, okay.
You know who I came up with? And I came up with Yoko Ono.
Oh. Okay.
Divorced twice before John Lennon was assassinated.
Okay. All right.
Jane Goodall.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I believe Betty White.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right. And I was like, you know what? If my name goes next to these women, so be it.
It's all
right?
good.
It's all good.
Oh, yeah, that's terrific. Gosh. Well, I do think we keep talking about this all day. And I think what we're going to have to do is when you go to San Diego to Camp Widow and I go to San Diego to Camp Widow, we'll just stay up all night talking and comparing stories.
Yes,
that would be
absolutely.
awesome. Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, I have such deep respect for what you do, Jenny, and so much gratitude because so much of my initial days, months, and maybe even like a couple of years of grief, I had isolated myself, only because I didn't know any better. And it's really only recently that I started to I found you because I was like, okay, list of podcasts, widowed, like this kind of a really basic search.
Yeah.
And it just really opened my eyes to, oh my God, look at all these people who are already doing all of the necessary work,
Yeah.
And with so many of your own story, and the way that you've kind of alchemized your experience and made it into something, the way that you serve the world. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. And I'm glad you found the podcast. I'm glad you found me. And I don't know, by the time this comes out, I'm not sure when this is coming out. I probably will have announced the Widowed Parent Institute, which is starting in September. Which is going to be even more creating a community for people, for all of us, right? Because this is bigger than me, for sure. It's about all of you guys out there, you and my listeners. We all need more support and more community, I think. So thank you. And thank you for being here. I think that's actually a terrific place to end. So my guest today is Mae Yoshikawa, widowed parent, author, yogi, based in Tokyo, Japan. So Mae, where can listeners find you if they would like to learn more about your work?
Right. Please find me on Instagram. My account name is MaeYoshikawa. And my website is maey.live. So please find me and give me a shout out. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, Jenny. And I can't wait to hit the camp with you and talk all night.
Yes, we will definitely do that. But I guess I think Camp Widow this year already just happened. So it'll have to be next year or some future year. But I will make sure to put a link to your Instagram and your website in the show notes as well, so that people can easily just hop right over there, follow you. And we'll keep an eye out for that book. Not sure when that's going to be. Maybe we'll have to have you back when that's ready to come out. So anyway, this has been so great. Mae, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's my joy and honor to spend this time with you and your audience.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Mae Yoshikawa as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 143. And if you are finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. And you can head on over to widowedparentsunite.com to pick up a copy of the brand new book, Widowed Parents Unite, which comes out on October 24th. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.